is Odile Le Bolloch and I work in the Environmental Protection Agency. I manage the Stop Food Waste programme. I suppose one of the things that I work on is the National Waste Prevention Programme. That's a strategy to reduce and prevent waste, and it looks at energy, water, waste and reduction in materials consumption. And basically this programme is funded by the Environment Fund, which is the ring-fenced fund where from the plastic bag tax and the landfill levy. So it's a good example of how that money is put back into environmental improvements. What we're trying to do is encourage people to move up the ladder, so you're going from landfill and up to the reduction of waste. I suppose that as you move up the ladder, reduction of waste in particular, you don't have to manage the waste or the costs associated with it. We found when we're doing this work in general that what's quite apparent is when you're trying to get people to reduce waste, it's not really about technology or significant investments, it's more about changing behaviour, and that's actually quite a difficult challenge. I suppose we're trying to introduce behavioural and technological changes by influencing consumption behaviours. A lot of our work actually involves working with people and changing their behaviours, and I think that could be apparent through this presentation. I suppose there's different phases of getting people to change, and we have sort of the early adopters, the followers and the persuadables, and that's generally where we are with the National Waste Prevention Programme at the moment. It involves using education, research and development, and maybe using sectoral champions and community activists, and also demonstrating techniques and maybe producing sector-specific guides on how you reduce waste. In terms of the compliers and the resistors, I suppose this is maybe for future consideration. There may be some form of regulatory intervention that's required. The main aspect of our programme is we use a sectoral approach because it's much easier when you're talking to people in a particular sector. They're, I suppose, sharing peer-to-peer experiences, and we can also frame messages of particular interest to particular sectors. Okay, so I suppose food waste in general. Food waste has been identified in the National Waste Prevention Programme as a priority waste stream. And I suppose while we in Ireland have been talking about increasing food production, I think we need to be careful, that there are already large quantities of food being wasted. And an EU study has tried to draw together a lot of any available data in terms of food waste, and it's found that the bulk of this, over 70%, originates in the household, food service and retail sectors. There's a bit of a health warning on this. I suppose the study did actually find that there's huge variability in quality of the data. Also, information gaps. Most of the data isn't comparable because they're all measured in different ways. Methodologies, waste surveys, all of that. So it's a huge caveat on that. What we do know in Ireland is we generate around 1 million tonnes of food waste a year, and about 60% of that comes from the commercial and the household sector. The EPA has been measuring food waste as part of its national waste report that it produces every year, and we've done waste characterisation studies, so we've got a good handle on food waste that comes from the municipal sector, which would be households and commercial. We do need to do more data on the types of food waste, and we're trying to work to improve the quality and fill information gaps. And in fact, my colleague, Colin Gibson from the Clean Technology Centre, who's running an EPA-funded research programme, will be talking after lunch if anyone is interested in the more data side of things in relation to food waste in the commercial sector. So if you look at the different stages of the food waste cycle, you have not only the impact of managing that wasted food, but you've also wasted all the inputs along the supply chain as well. So you have the resources and inputs that have been used for production, processing, transport, and even the consumption steps. And that's not only that, but you've also produced unnecessary emissions for all of those different phases. As I mentioned, food has been identified as a priority waste and is covered in several of our programmes. We have the Green Healthcare Programme. We have the Local Authority Prevention Network, where we work with environmental officers in county councils. We have our Green Business Programme, we have Stop Food Waste, and also the Green Hospitality Programme, which works with people in the hospitality sector. And just a special mention, we work with the Irish Farmers Association to develop a smart farming initiative, and that actually looks at resource efficient food production. These are some of the sectoral guides that have been produced over time. Any of those are available if you go to the EPA website or begreen.ie, you'll find them there. The other important thing is that resource efficiency can actually also have significant cost savings. These figures, just yet again, I suppose they're kind of a conservative estimate. Food wasted is money wasted, and if you take into account the cost to buy and cook and store the food, as well as the waste management costs, 1 kilogram of food costs around €2. That's a very low conservative estimate. It can cost anything up to even a fiver a kilogram as well. And also, it's been a bit difficult to find a lot of data, but I've seen some studies say that about 1 tonne of food waste generates somewhere between 1.9 and 3.8 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. Just by way of illustration of some of the work that we've been doing, I've chosen a few examples, and the most dramatic is the work that has been done in the healthcare sector in particular through our Green Healthcare Programme. Green Healthcare is a programme delivered using some of the lessons that were learned in the Green Hospitality Programme. So it's the same basic premise that you're delivering mass catering to people, albeit in a different environment. But it's the same idea of producing meals, giving them to people, hoping they eat it all, and managing the waste from it. The programme is managed by our partners, the Clean Technology Centre, based in Cork Institute of Technology. And they've been working in conjunction with the HSE, which I think is really important to mention. And to date, they've been working with 25 acute hospitals in Ireland, which covers over 50% of the acute hospital beds in Ireland. And work, I suppose, based over a number of years now. At this stage, they identified, even just as an example, about €3 million worth of potential savings in relation to food that was prepared and not consumed. I suppose the obvious conclusion before anyone starts making jokes about, hospital food and all of that, this is actually food that was prepared and not even served to the patients in the first place, so it's literally just being produced in the kitchens. And about 31% of the food waste generated is this unserved food. Some of the examples of that would be to do with poor communication and ordering, and in relation to maybe having a menu where one contractor was told that he couldn't provide a paper menu due to infection control reasons, and most hospitals use paper menus. So once this was kind of pointed out, it was investigated further, and it was clarified that this wasn't the case, and he was then able to provide paper menus. I suppose it's just an example of this sort of communication is really the key, rather than any incredible technology. And then in another particular ward, there was the ward staff weren't actually giving the patients the menu, they were deciding what people were going to eat off that. So that yet again was changed around, where patients were given an option to decide what they wanted to eat. And there was another example in particular where the kitchen staff would always add a little bit extra in the trays they were sending up, but the ward staff were also ordering a little bit extra. So they had 2 bits to be sure that there was enough to go around. And then sometimes, there were just basic admin procedures where patients were discharged, but lunch was ordered for them anyway, and people out all day maybe, and they had their food sent out anyway. This slide just shows the amount of unserved food in one ward, and this never even made it to the patients. So this is just an example of stuff that came up from the kitchen, and it was served to the patients, but it was still way over a huge amount. This automatic provision of bread used to be where patients would automatically be given a couple of slices of bread with the condiments all wrapped up in cling film and sent to the patients. Some of the changes involved just actually serving the bread up on the ward and asking people how much they wanted. Similarly, with the provision of condiments, in general, they were all automatically put on the tray, and once the tray is presented to the patient, obviously none of this can be reused. So this is an example of the kind of condiments that were coming off wards. Yet again, this is the same thing, just the people who were serving up the meals would ask people, did they want salt and pepper or jam or whatever. This was some of the, this is an example in a large acute hospital. And they took steps to reduce the food wastage. And they did general things in terms of reducing the portion size of the meal. They reduced, scoop sizes of vegetables and things like that. They changed the bread provision, so instead of automatically providing 1.5 slices, they provided 1. They reduced the butter from 2 to 1. They, same with the condiments, things like that. And most of this just arose out of more awareness, and I would point out that the changes in portion size were done in consultation with the nutritionists on the ward, so it wasn't that anyone was being deprived of a meal. And so the key point there to say is that they reduced their food waste by 42%, and they saved about €20,000 in 2 months, and that obviously would be projected to about €120,000 per annum. If you extrapolate that up, looking at the 25 hospitals that have been worked with, you can see that the savings would be quite significant for the health sector in general, up to like 7.2 million in the acute hospitals. In addition to ward and kitchen waste, there was also a significant amount of food waste in the canteen, in particular things that were unserved in the canteen. Some facilities would dispose of these things, whereas others would keep them for a set period of time, making sure it was labelled. And I suppose, yet again, if it can be done in one facility, it could be done in others. Some great examples of reuse of unserved food from the kitchen and canteens, where one facility, they don't provide a nighttime canteen service for the staff, so a large proportion of the food that was prepared during the day would have been plated into meals and then stored in a chilled vending machine, and then a microwave would be available for the staff, and they would have these meals in the evening. So instead of it being wasted, they were actually turning a profit from it. It was available for staff to purchase. And then another facility was actually serving some of this unserved food to the local meals on wheels as well. So yet again, was just finding a good use for it. And the system of a similar system is also used actually in the hospitality school in Cork Institute of Technology, where the food that's produced by the students as they're learning is also wrapped and offered as meals to people to buy at the end of the day. Just some brief examples in the hospitality and catering service. We work, as I mentioned, I work a lot with the environmental awareness officers in the county councils. And this first example was done by Wicklow County Council, and they did a waste audit of their staff canteen, and they found there was an awful lot of salad waste coming out. And what they did was quite simple actually. It was generally what was happening was that the salad was being served to people by people behind the counter. So they just turned the counter around and put plates in front, and instead of salad spoons, they served salad tongs, and suddenly they had a salad bar that people could help themselves from, and the amount of salad waste coming out in their waste bins was reduced significantly. This is a pub in Monaghan. They would produce a lovely grilled steak with chips, and they put a garnish of half a tomato on the side, half a grilled tomato. They noticed that this tomato was coming back all the time, so they just stopped putting it on the plate. Nobody missed it. It saved them €2,000 a year just by doing that. And then we have just in terms of it was a hotel with serving wedding banquets, and they found a lot of vegetables coming back on plates into the bin. And most of that was just involved the guest didn't eat them. So what they started to do, instead of automatically issuing those little side plates to everyone with vegetables on them, they produced large bowls in the centre of the table. And they also trained the staff to make sure to say that there was more if they wanted more. So instead of automatically deciding how much people were going to eat. And that actually reduced that and a couple of other measures, reduced their food waste by 37%. And they estimated that would probably save them about €15,000 a year. So I suppose just to finish there, in conclusion, before we start talking about increased food production, there are currently huge quantities of food being wasted by consumers, and our challenge to tackle that is to reduce consumption behaviours. And that doesn't have to, as I've shown, it doesn't have to involve significant behaviour or significant technological investments, but changing behaviour is actually quite hard to do, so it does involve a lot of intervention and people-to-people activities. We all like to do what we've always done. We're quite resistant to changing our behaviour, even though we know it's the right thing. So it's not about education, it's about actually enabling the change in behaviour and creating the right environment for people to make that change. I suppose similarly, any increase in food production needs to be done in a resource efficient way, and we need to decouple economic growth from resource use, and it makes good sense. Food waste costs money, and I suppose that's just what I want to finish on. I'd just like to point out that no money was actually harmed in the making of this video.
Thanks very much.